Now we are shifting gears and we're going to be focusing on the present day communities and peoples who are responding to the uncertain future of climate change and politics. Specifically, we are asking our panelists and speakers to address how are we to live amidst this uncertainty. First, we will hear from Jim Robison. Jim is a doctoral candidate at Fordham who is writing his dissertation on Thomas Merton, Rosemary Radford Ruether, and the Agape community, and he is a current member of the Agape Mission Council. So let's give it up for Jim.
Thank you so much. I just want to start by saying that I am very much on the same page as Stellan and so many other speakers who have already spoken, and maybe I'm slightly on a different paragraph within that same page, and I hope to contribute something new here. So what I want to start by acknowledging is that we are all enmeshed, as we know, in an ecological crisis that is simultaneously a social crisis as well as a spiritual crisis. And what this crisis comes down to at an essential level is broken relationships. The essence of this crisis that manifests at an ecological level, at a social level, and at a spiritual level is broken relationality. And we exist in broken relationality. We exist in shattered solidarity with the Earth community, with the more than human world. We exist in shattered solidarity with the human community. And we exist in shattered solidarity, broken relationship with the divine, with the ground of all being. And as we look at these roots, as we look for the roots of our broken relationship, which ultimately, again, is the nature of this eco-crisis, I would argue it's both the seed of the eco-crisis and the fruit of the tree that is the eco-crisis. It starts with broken relationships and it leads to broken relationships. So we really need to identify the roots of this. What is causing this broken relationality? We know it's not good. We're looking at the effects of it. And I would argue that we need to look both within and without in attempting to identify these roots. So we need to look both within the structures of human consciousness. We need to look within our own minds. We need to look within the intimate interiority of ourselves. The interior landscape, we need to look for the roots there, and we simultaneously need to look for them in the systems that structure our world, in the broader systems of domination that shape the patterns of being that have become default for us. So we need to look both within and without for the roots of this crisis that is both ecological, social, and spiritual. Now, what I do is I turn to two figures of authority in attempting to identify these roots and in attempting to respond to them constructively. I look to Thomas Merton and Rosemary Radford Ruether, and the two of them exchanged letters in the late 60s. So Merton, of course, a Trappist monk committed to contemplative surrender to the divine, as well as prophetic engagement with the world. And Ruether at the time was a young 29-year-old theologian. And they exchanged about 40 letters dealing with the world in crisis and the church in crisis and how to navigate it. And I get from their larger bodies of work two categories that I find to be very illuminating. One is the false self. That comes from Thomas Merton. And that, to me, the false self is this element within us, within the structure of our consciousness that moves us out of harmony with life, out of harmony with the divine, into alienation, into brokenness, into fragmentation. It operates within us. But then we have to turn to this exterior roots. And I get that from Ruether, the systems of domination that we're ensnared in. So again, we're finding ourselves in broken relationality, and it's manifesting both within and without, and we need to address it at both levels. And I think one way that we can do that is to weave together the contemplative tradition, which is the tradition of surrendering ourselves to the ground of all being, with the prophetic tradition, which is to actively resist and work to dismantle the systems of domination that we are embedded in. So we need to weave them both together. Now, Pope Francis, in his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, calls all people of goodwill, not just Catholics, not just Christians, all people of goodwill, to what he calls an ecological conversion. And he emphasizes this conversion, and that word conversion in its Latin roots literally means to turn around. So we're going down the wrong path. We're oriented toward an inappropriate horizon, and we need to actively turn around and start over. We need to move in a radically different direction. Francis emphasizes this conversion is both personal and communal. It has to happen again at the interior level as well as at the systemic level. So we need community. That's where we're at in navigating these broken relationships which constitute our eco-crisis. We can't do it alone, because to be alone is the problem. To be alone is to be broken. So the way we work our way out of that, out of our broken relationality with the divine, with one another, and with the more than human world, is in community. And I would argue that agape is a very powerful community in which this ecological conversion, which is also a social conversion, which is also a spiritual conversion, is and has been actively taking on flesh. So agape is a community of conversion that weaves together the contemplative with the prophetic, that weaves together receptive surrender to the divine with prophetic and active resistance to the systems of domination. And agape is weaving and woven into a wider web of contemplative surrender and prophetic resistance. And this is our tradition. We're all gathered here today in this beautiful tradition. All of us are woven into this web, even as we are weaving it here now. And as we weave this web of celebration and resistance, the living God is breaking through our brokenness and bringing about wholeness, and we can feel it. And this is the good news. This is the good news, and at Agape it is concretely embodied, and I'm always happy to come here and to feel the good news concretely embodied. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim, for beautifully capturing the essence of our crisis, especially touching on broken relationships. So next, we are going to hear from Anne and Edgar Hayes. They are a husband and wife co-founders of Freedom Farm, modeled after the Agape community, with an emphasis on organic farming for inner city youth and multi-ethnic and racially diverse inclusivity, and they are members of Agape's Mission Council. Let's give it up for Anne and Edgar.
Now go. Amen. Making sure. All right. Get ready for your mind to be blown. we had planned something like this is what we're gonna do, and we saw that question and was like, are we answering that question? Well, let's hope so. All right. How do you want to start it off? What we do, that's the main question, the main crux of why we're here, as what we do. And the biggest challenge, because I was thinking about what are the challenges of community? We got to remember that there are lots and lots and lots and lots of challenges to community. And when we were under the tent, it would just come into my head. It's like, bam, 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 bing, bing, bing. All the problems. Because we tend to romanticize community. I remember when I was interning here, when it was Suzanne Brayton and I, we used to, during lunch, we had a reading. Brayton would pull out John Vanier's book on community. And he was like, struggle, 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 right? And, I called Brayton up. And when I left, and I was like, we were talking about what type of community that, we should be, Ann and I. He won't remember. You remember that? I think so. And one of the challenges, here they're a living, working community. For us, we live in the community. I work outside of the community, and I come back into the community. And then there are challenges of doing that and being that type of community. And I was talking earlier that community is not for everyone. Nope. It's a calling, and that, and you have to work on it. You have to want to do it. That's where the intentionality comes in. When we say intentional community, I know we throw it out intentional like baseball, intentional, but it's something that you have to want to do and work at, like marriage, like relationships. If you want it to grow, if you want it to flourish, you have to work at it because of the struggles that will happen. You can say, I'm out, I'm getting a divorce, or I'm out, I'm leaving you, with community. I was telling someone that if I was reincarnated 100 times, I will live in community because it's so special and wonderful. And the what and the why. I would like you to talk about the why. Can you talk about the why? Wow. or the what? What is it that we do? If you can, so pleasingly, expound on your expert tutelage.
Okay. Well, I could give you a little story.
Let me get closer.
All right. Hi. All right. Everybody take just a second to stretch here. So, little snippet. Some of you already know this, but we moved from the South Bronx to a 59-acre farm in Middletown, New York, not really knowing anything about how to farm. So it's been a terrifying and exciting adventure all along the way. We're definitely inspired by Agape, so we're trying in our own little ways also to be responsible in terms of the environment. Solar panels, passive solar, also trying to do hospitality. But if we hadn't, maybe as teens and early 20s, we were drawn to do an experiment like this, like an urban-rural connection farm, probably because we were learning about world problems, had lived in the city, and we're working on these kinds of things in our mind and writing papers about them and angry about them and wanting to change the world. And by the time we ended up on the land, then we really needed to start the prayer. Now I get it. 3 times a day, I need to be on my knees to be able to do this. And thank God, because that also is what makes us want to keep doing it and helps us fill our cups. And so I think that answers part of now what I'm seeing more, the why and the how. For us, anyway, the prayer is totally vital. But yeah, in terms of what, it's mostly doing youth and young adult ministry and growing organic food to share with people who don't have access to or can't afford organic produce.
And working with youth.
Young people, mostly from the city, like where we were working with young people in the Bronx, and then now we're continuing to work at the farm with young people, mostly from the Bronx and Brooklyn.
And the why, why do we do this? Why not, just have our white picket fence and dog and 2 kids in a house? The American dream, right? When you see what's happening in the world, when you see the poverty, when you see the struggle that people are going through, when you see the pain that people are going through, how can you not be moved by it? You can gloss over it, like we walk by homeless people and we don't acknowledge their existence, or we don't feel like giving that moment at that moment. It's easy to just brush on by, and we do it in New York City. We don't acknowledge people's existence. We just, that's the life of New York City. Sometimes I like to throw in a good morning. Blows their mind. They don't know what to do. Did he just say good morning? What's going on? What do you want from me? But yeah, there is so much pain and struggle, and God, it just moves you to how we say the divine or the creator. It just moves you to say, this shouldn't be. This can't be. There's no way in the world we can say that it's okay for someone to be hungry, or that there isn't enough food in the world, to feed the masses, the billions of people in the world, when you can create so much food with such little seed. One little seed can feed with whatever plant that you're growing can feed so many people. So you plant 2 seeds, you plant 3 seeds, 4 seeds. The abundance that will come out of that, spiritually, physically, and serving others. And that's what God calls us to do, is to serve others and to be a part of others' lives, and to be a part of one another. That's what community is, to be a part of each other's lives. That, no man or woman or child is an island of their own, can live on an island of their own, right? We need each other, and we have to understand that. Anyone want to add to that?
Maybe a takeaway point would be, and I wish Stevie Wonder was here, but to quote Stevie Wonder, hold on to your dreams, because they're always worth having. So you might just have you might just have a dream to play the guitar, or just a piece of a dream, or to create a community, or whatever it is. And maybe you haven't had time to dream, but take time to dream. And then once you begin to have one, things that are calling you or that you might love to do, hold on to them. Not just like this, but hold on to them. And because gathered here today, we're people of faith, or we are people who are seeking, and we want to live our dreams into existence. I mean, shalom, like that's a beautiful dream that we have. It's not here yet, but we have glimpses of it. That's why some of us say on earth as it is in heaven. So I encourage everyone, as you're taking Daniel's advice, to leave here with something, think about what is it that is calling you, or what are you dreaming of? What would you love to do? Because it might be a piece of it that links to something else that somebody else wants to, will join you on. So I'll try to end with how much over time are we? A brief story. Done? Okay. Done. I'll talk to you later. Love you.
Thank you, Anne and Edgar, for reflecting head on the issues within intentional community and what it takes to build, maintain, and grow communities over time. So far, there seems to be these thematic words throughout the day, specifically relationships, intention, struggle, nonviolence, sorrow, resiliency, and planting seeds. So with that said, we will continue to our next speaker, Nathan Kleben. So Nathan is an alternative to violence facilitator. He is a former Catholic worker. He recently arrived from California to Agape, where he is living as an intern. Give it up for Nathan.
Hello. Hello. My name is Nathan, and I'll continue on the theme of community. That's the topic, right, today? So I think of the question, how do I, as one person, kind of make a difference in the world, given all the stuff going on? And the answer that I've heard someone else say is don't be one person. Don't be one person. So that's kind of the call for community. And I'll just have a disclaimer right now. Much of what I say is going to be other people talking, and so no original thoughts. It's all been said before. It's all cycles. And so for me, one of the things about community that I really value, and a part of why I'm here at Agape, is the focus on the contemplative life. And contemplative living, having that deep intention towards looking deeply within and without. I think of it's like in Buddhism, the practice of vipassana. I think one way it translates is to see things clearly as they are. And then out of that clear seeing, we can respond appropriately to circumstances around us. And so with contemplative living, we can see not just kind of the world around us, which is much more complicated than any one person can understand, with the kind of this vast interconnectedness and series of relationships, very complicated. And also, but not just outside, but also inside the internal world. And it's like living in community. You kind of are very close together, and there's a little friction. There's friction, and you kind of rub off on one another, and that can be painful. And we see our kind of our shadow sides and all that. And it's like at Agape, at 30 years of Francis days, I think no more shadows. They've all been cleared out. Right? So it's this ongoing work, and we need to be able to see clearly what's going on inside and out to be able to respond appropriately. And so that contemplative practice is really important. And so thinking now of community in this time of ecological crisis, political instability, and a lot of the stuff on the outside. And of course, there's mirrors to our own personal relationships with the stuff going on around us because we're enmeshed in it. But on the stuff on the outside, especially with the environment, I think it's, if we can see things clearly and do that work together to see what's going on and what the difficulties are, how we move forward, then we can kind of respond appropriately and lovingly and kindly. And so one way I think about that is if our loyalty is with the natural world, with trees and rivers and mountains and insects and chipmunks and human beings, all of us, all life, if our loyalty is there, then it becomes much more clear. It becomes clear what we need to do. And if we can get that kind of clarity, we'll know what we need to do.
Thank you, Nathan, for telling us how to make a difference and addressing it in a contemplative way, specifically starting with the internal to help see things as they are and using that to address them appropriately and lovingly. So with that said, we are going on to our next speaker, the Bruderhof community. The Bruderhof community is a Christian-based community rooted in nonviolence. So will members of the Bruderhof community please come up and share a little bit about your community? Thank you.
Fall into the fire.
Hello, everyone. My name is Simeon. So we are the Bruderhof, and since we're talking about community, I thought it would be neat to tell a bit about how our community works as an example. Our life together is founded on Jesus Christ, the Son of God. We desire to love Him, to follow Him, to obey His commandments, and to testify in word and deed to the coming of His kingdom here on earth. We stem from the Anabaptist tradition and are a peace church, but feel akin to all who are pledged to full discipleship of Jesus. We recognize His power to work in all people, regardless of their creed or walk of life. For us to live for the kingdom of God leads to church community. Such a people came into being in Jerusalem at the first Pentecost, as described in Acts 2 and 4. We are a fellowship of brothers and sisters, both single and married, who are actually called by Christ to follow him together in community of goods, and we desire to remain true and faithful to this calling all of our lives. Church community is a gift of the Holy Spirit. Without God's help, we human beings are selfish and divided, unfit for such a life together. As Jesus tells us, apart from me, you can do nothing. We remain sinners, utterly dependent on his grace. Yet we have experienced and experience again and again Christ's transforming love. He makes it possible for ordinary men and women to live together in forgiveness and mutual trust as brothers and sisters. It is a life of love where work, worship, mission, education, and family life are brought together into a single whole. We are convinced that such a life is the greatest service we can render humanity and is, in fact, the answer to the world's problems. Is it easy? No. It involves constant seeking and struggle, admonition, encouragement, helping one another to stay the course. But it also brings great joy in the togetherness and peace that are given. Because forgiveness is a power. Celebrations of Christmas, Easter, harvest, weddings, every new baby, every season, with contributions by families, school, and children's groups, young people, including plays, music, singing, hiking, camping, and most important, our communal work. We have our own daycare and school through 12th grade. We take care of our elderly and sick, and there is not retirement. Please come visit and see for yourself. This life is there for everyone. Yes, it means total surrender, total commitment of all we are and have, but the blessings are countless.
Okay, so my name's Ian Winter. I've been with the community 72 years, just about. I went to Penn State, not quite 72. But this is a historical moment. 30 years of living in community. 37. That's even better. Our movement is just about 100 years old next year. So we're going to do a little choreography for you and a message to stay the course. It goes like this. You with me? Incy wincy spider climbs up the garden spout. Down happens to all of us. And washed the spider out. Happens to us too. Came the sun and dried up all the rain. And this is the point. Spider climbs up the spout again. You have to keep trying and keep walking. Okay, now we'll sing one song, please.
One song, and it goes with everything we've heard and said, the hope, the sorrow, the peace, all these things. Oh my gosh. Peace be yours till we meet again. Peace fill your heart till we meet again. God bless your days. Fill them with peace till we meet again. And then it's joy, and then it's love. Peace be yours till we meet again.
Peace fill your heart till we meet again. God bless your days. Fill them with peace till we meet again. Joy be yours till we meet again. Joy fill your heart till we meet again. God bless your days. Fill them with joy till we meet again.
Pixie spider. Let's do it again.
That's a message for all the people.
That's perfect. All right. Thank you, Bruderhof community, for sharing your witness and loving and living for people from all walks of life, and to be that example of unconditional love and care for all life. And thank you for the very fun reminder to persevere through the difficult times with peace and joy. So next we will be hearing from Dave O'Brien. Dave O'Brien is Professor Emeritus at Holy Cross College. He has served as president of the Catholic Historical Association after nearly 40 years teaching American Catholic history and Catholic social and political thought in Holy Cross classrooms. He is Loyola Professor of Roman Catholic Studies, and he will be retiring at the end of the academic year. His long teaching career at Holy Cross has been accompanied by national recognition and acclaim. One of the first scholars to specialize in American Catholic history, O'Brien is widely published. He is a frequent lecturer. He is a recipient of many honors and awards for his work. He has also been at the forefront of social causes and activism since the Vietnam War protests. He has been a friend at Agape since the 1980s, and he wrote a brilliant introduction to Suzanne M. Brayton's book, Loving Life on the Margarines. Joanne O'Brien, David's wife, is a dear friend of the community, both of whom have been steadfast supporters for all of these years. He is the author of several books on Catholic social teaching and American Catholicism. Let's give it up for Dave O'Brien.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here always on Francis Day. And I have a very limited task today, which is to introduce a friend of mine to you. A couple of years ago on Francis Day, they had a panel of a new generation of leaders who were out there in farming communities around the country, one of whom was a woman named Brenna. And Brenna didn't know I was there. And when she was introduced, she said that when she was a student at Holy Cross, she took a class with Dave O'Brien. And she said she was interested in the Catholic worker movement. And David sent her to meet Claire Schaefer Duffy. And she said, that meeting and Claire's friendship changed my life. And she thought for a minute, she didn't know I was there, she thought for a minute and said, I don't remember anything about the course. So I'm here to tell you, to introduce to you a gentleman who came to Holy Cross about 30 years ago as a student, and I introduced him to Brayton and Suzanne. His name is Ted Henken. Ted was a leader of the student peace groups at Holy Cross. He spent a internship here at Agape one summer, and while he was here, he put the shingles on that little shed you pass on the way to the straw bale house. And today he even showed me he still has a scar on his finger that summer. When Ted left Holy Cross, he went to New Orleans, fell in love with the community of New Orleans, and he studied at Tulane University, where he got a PhD in 2003. And since 2003, he's been professor of Latin American Studies at Baruch College, which is part of the City University of New York. Ted is also one of the nation's leading authorities on the contemporary life of Cuba. And he was in Cuba when our Congressman Jim McGovern, and he accompanied President Obama to the visit that opened up Cuba a few years ago to the United States. I know Brayton and Suzanne are delighted to welcome Ted back here to Agape, and I have a great honor and privilege of introducing Ted to all of you. Ted.
So I guess the first thing I should say here is that I remember everything that Dave O'Brien ever taught me. And I'll be giving a lecture over under that white tent later to share all of that with you. Number of things that I'd like to share. And the first is, after college and after my experience here, there was an unsure path before me. And, which of the inspirations would I follow? What practical application would I take? And I guess in a kind of a formal way, I became an academic. And that is my career, and that is my day in and day out existence. My wife is still not sure what I do all day since I teach class twice a week. And if that were her life, she would be very happy. She teaches public school, special ed, ESL public school in New York City. So she's in the trenches, and I'm in the cafes, right? And so it's always unclear. And I say, well, I'm working on an article. I'm working on a book. So, my dedication in terms of formally is as an academic and living that life and following that calling. And sometimes in doing that, it's sometimes very isolating and lonely and not part of a community of scholars maybe, but that's often theoretical and filled with criticism because that's what scholars are supposed to do to each other, right? But also there's a lot of room for connections and network building, especially across disciplinary and national linguistic lines. But I guess one of the things that strikes me being here is both how far removed I am from this world, but also the fact that I'm here reminds me that I'm connected, right? One thing that I thought of when our brothers and sisters from the Bruderhof community who I met and talked to before presented was I thought to myself, wow, how radically different is my life from the life that they have chosen to live. And we talked before and discovered that I'm either 1 hour south of them on the Hudson River or they're 1 hour north of me on the Hudson River. So very soon we'll be visiting one another to share. I mean, I live the life of the, kind of somewhat typical liberal-minded urban college professor in a nuclear family, paying a mortgage, and trying to find or reestablish some sense of community in an anonymous urban environment where we're in some ways in the rat race. And having children, I have a 5-year-old blonde child who's been singing and screaming and having a great time here. And we love it here because there's no cars that we have to worry about, and everyone is like an aunt or an uncle, very loving and welcoming, and he has lots of other friends his age to play with. But it's often, having the children has reconnected me, regrounded me, because I'm now around other children, other parents, and building a community that way. I come from a very tight-knit parish, Catholic parish in Pensacola, Florida, where my parents were kind of pillars of that community. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was very, very, very lucky to not just be members of the family, but be members of the community that they knit together. Our home was much like Agape in that sense that it was everyone's home. The door were open. I didn't actually have keys to a place I lived until I moved to New Orleans. My home that I grew up in 25 years, we never had keys because the door was always unlocked and people would just come in unannounced. And I didn't realize how rare and weird that was until I left it, and I didn't realize how much I would miss it. I left community, I left family, I left that world because the message that I had kind of internally but also was given to me was you need to leave and achieve. And, I don't regret that at all, but in the last 5 or 10 years, I realized the importance, again, of feeling rooted and feeling connected. And so that's the thing that I want to kind of, reflect on is being here. It's almost, I realize in the life cycle there are times when it's essential to leave and achieve, and other times it's essential to remind yourself or be reminded that you always have a home to come back to or to play a part in. I guess the last thing that I should share is a kind of an illustration of some of the ways that my path has in many ways gone far afield from Holy Cross or Agape, but in many ways have tried to live out in different ways the values that I continue to share, even if I can't really say anymore that I share the identity of being Catholic. You just don't tell my dear departed parents that, right? But that is the path, that's part of my path. But the values that they taught me and that were reinforced at Holy Cross, in Dave O'Brien's classes in this community are still very fundamental to me. And so finding ways to live those values outside of a church community or a faith community has sometimes been a challenge. One thing that has been one of the kind of thing I'm most proud of in terms of that is building bridges across national borders, across languages, across cultures, and across, you could say, political systems. And that's a big part of what motivates my work in Cuba, but more importantly with Cubans of many different backgrounds and political philosophies and belief systems. Part of the system in Cuba more often, in Cuba, but kind of alienated from the system of Cuba, the government system. But those international links, the language links, building bridges of understanding, of outreach, bringing students to Cuba, bringing Cubans to the United States to build some kind of common understanding based on shared values that has been really trampled upon by politics and governments, for 60 years, and unfortunately is being trampled upon with gusto once again by, over the last 2.5 years, by our clown in chief, who will remain nameless. So the thing that I think I should part with is something I learned in all of these travels in Spanish, and I taught to my son. And you guys can either sing along or maybe better yet hum along with me, and it goes like this. La pequeña arañita subió, subió, subió. Vino la lluvia y todo se llevó. Salió el sol y todo se secó. Y la pequeña arañita subió, subió, subió.
Thank you, Ted, for sharing from your academic lens and from both the urban living world as well. And thank you to all the speakers for sharing your wisdom and insight as to how we are to live in our current environment.